Good morning. I want to welcome you all here today to join our Autogas webinar. I'm Wanda Forrest. I'm the coordinator for the North Florida Clean Fuels Coalition. And we're really excited to host this event. We feel like it's a great opportunity to learn more about propane autogas. And with that, I have a few housekeeping rules I'd like to talk to you about. Everyone is on mute, and we'll welcome all your questions, but please submit them at the Q&A feature on the screen. This is recorded. We will post it on our website, and copies will be available to you. And with that, let's get started. What we're going to do today is talk about answer three potential questions. What are the benefits of propane autogas? How is it being used in the Florida fleets? And how can you use it in your fleet? We have a great lineup of speakers today to help answer some of those questions. We have a very robust agenda. With that, I'll get started. The North Florida Clean Fuels Coalition was founded in 2009. It represents 6 county service area. We are a nonprofit, and we are hosted by the North Florida Transportation Planning Organization. We were designated in 2016 by the Department of Energy as a Clean Cities coalition. In fact, there are over 100 of us across the country, and we are actually the last one to be designated. The public-private partnership advocates using alternative fuels and advanced vehicle technology, and that is to reduce petroleum consumption, improve air quality, and develop regional economic opportunity. We promote 6 alternative fuels, and one of those is propane. The North Florida Clean Fuels Coalition developed their master plan in 2013, and from that master plan, we have identified and invested in $6.5 million in infrastructure and vehicle projects. In 2016, FHWA designated our corridors within our North Florida TPO area as alternative fuel corridors. We also did a feasibility assessment for Clay and Nassau counties looking at alternative fuels, and out of that study, propane was a recommended fuel for those counties. We developed an alternative fuel gap analysis in 2019, and we've strived to be a clearinghouse for information about alternative fuels and advanced fuel technology. We've conducted many public educational outreach. We've done alternative fuel expos. We've done specific events for propane and different alternative fuels. And this slide identifies some of the events and promotional materials that we have done for propane. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Ben Moore, who is a sustainability leader for RS&H. He's going to talk about propane use in North Florida, and also he is also our moderator today. And Ben has been a great asset to our North Florida Clean Fuels Coalition. And with that, Ben, I'm turning it over to you.
Thanks, Wanda. I'm going to grab control of the slides here eventually and go through a few slides of my own here. And as soon as that happens, we'll be off to the races. Okay. Perhaps someone can advance the slides for me because it is not working very well for me at the moment. All right, apologies for the lag here. Now I think we're a few slides ahead of where we should be. Okay, we've landed. So I have worked with Wanda Forrest at the North Florida TPO on alt fuels for many years. And one thing that we've done is we've been tracking the progress in the use of alternative fuels in our region over the years. And this slide shows the use of autogas in North Florida over the past 4 years. And you can see that we've had relatively consistent use of propane in fleets in North Florida, somewhere between 400 to 500,000 gallons of autogas used in the region. And we have roughly 150 or so propane vehicles active in the community as we speak. It's a very diverse kind of fleet. We have vocational vehicles, light duty trucks using propane. We have tow trucks using propane. We have school buses using propane. You'll hear a bit about that later on in the presentation. We have even a tour provider in St. Augustine using propane, food service delivery. So really, that's a testament to the flexibility of this fuel. So this slide shows alternative fuel use in our region over the past 4 years. These are all the fuels, all the alternative fuels that we track. And what you see here is on the dark blue line that alternative fuel use is really accelerating in North Florida. 38.2 million gallons of petroleum fuels avoided by using alternative fuels in our region in 2019. The real kind of distinguishing feature of North Florida is the dramatic use of LNG by the off-road industry, rail and seaport users. And propane here at the top is a small but significant proportion of the alternative fuel use in our region. The next slide, when it comes up, shows you propane's share of the on-road alternative fuel use in our region. So somewhere between 6 and 2% over the past few years. And what I think this illustrates is that there's a great opportunity, an untapped resource in some ways, to use propane autogas in North Florida. It's already being used by diversity of fleets, as I showed you, but it is a great application for many more fleets, and we're hoping to see its use being taken on in the future in a greater degree. Another thing that we have accomplished in North Florida is to designate some of our key roadways as alternative fuel corridors. And so those of you who live in North Florida are familiar with I-295, the ring road, the ring highway around the Jacksonville region. And you can travel this interstate with a propane vehicle and never worry about the need to fuel up your vehicle. That's what the alternative fuel designation really means, is that that there is infrastructure to fuel your alternative fuel vehicle along its extent. So I-295 is designated for propane autogas. And we have identified the need for additional infrastructure in some of our other interstates. The next slide, when it appears, will show you that. And here we see I-10 and we see I-95, and we're actively looking for opportunities to build out the propane autogas fueling infrastructure along these two important interstates so that folks can use them in the region without fear of finding the propane autogas resource. So lots going on in North Florida, a lot of potential in North Florida for propane autogas. At this point, I'm going to hand it off to Alex with the Tampa Bay Clean Fuels Coalition, so you can get a sense of what's going on in that part of the state.
Thank you, Ben. And good morning, everyone. My name is Alex Kolbakov. I'm the coordinator for the Tampa Bay Clean Cities Coalition. And Wanda already talked a little bit about the Clean Cities program. And the Clean Cities program is managed by the United States Department of Energy. And the primary goal is to reduce the petroleum use in transportation. The Tampa Bay Clean Cities Coalition that I represent, we were officially designated right before North Florida Clean Cities Coalition in 2014. And currently, there are 4 designated coalitions in the state of Florida. Our mission aligns pretty closely with the national program. But the main idea for the coalition is to embrace the non-petroleum-based transportation fuels without sacrificing the mobility and the quality of life. Now, we cover 6-county area in Tampa Bay region, and there are a variety of alternative fuels in Tampa Bay, from CNG to propane to electric to biodiesel. But the propane market is rather significant, and the usage continues to grow from year to year. We have diverse fleets that use propane in our area, from light duty to medium duty vehicles. And the light duty application includes Polk County Sheriff's Office that runs 140 dual fuel propane cruisers. Those cruisers, they idle a lot, so using propane allows to significantly reduce emissions. And since they're dual fuel, it allows for good flexibility in fueling. So the use of this propane fleet helped displace 119,000 gallons of gasoline and reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 168 tons, and this is per year. Now, the medium duty application includes the propane school buses. We have 4 school districts in Tampa Bay, including Hillsborough, Pinellas, Pasco, and Polk, that together run 249 propane school buses, and that's the data from last year. So this helped displace 1.4 million gallons of gasoline and reduced greenhouse gas emissions by 408 tons. And again, this is the data per year. Now I want to also say a few words about the role that alternative fuels and propane in particular can play in diversifying fuel supply and enhancing the area's resilience to natural disasters such as hurricanes. We're currently involved in an effort led by the Florida Energy Office to incorporate the alternative fuels in statewide emergency planning to enhance resilience. And propane can offer some significant benefits in that respect. Some of the benefits that propane can offer are on your screen. First is its delivery method. Unlike gasoline and diesel that are delivered through ports and are vulnerable to disruptions of port operations during hurricanes, propane is delivered to Florida by rail, and that is not as vulnerable to hurricanes as other delivery methods, as the port deliveries. Propane also has an interesting feature that it can be stored indefinitely. Unlike conventional petroleum fuels, it does not degrade, which makes it a good backup storage fuel. It also provides comparable fuel time to gasoline and diesel, which makes it rather convenient. And it also allows for mobile fueling to ensure that you can bring the fuel to vehicles that need it. And one of the pictures on the slide shows that mobile fueler. Now, and of course, there are propane powered generators that can be also very handy when the power is out and other fuels are in short supply. And you can see a picture of such generator on the slide as well. And with that, I'll turn it over to the next speaker.
Thanks, Alex. So next on our slate is Steve Whaley. Steve is Director of Autogas Business Development for the Propane Education and Research Council. And he's got a fantastic presentation on kind of propane A to Z. You're going to learn a lot from Steve.
Thanks, Ben. Nothing like putting the pressure on there. I appreciate that. And Wanda, thanks for having us. And Alex, I really want to actually elaborate a little bit more on what you were saying about, the displacing of the conventional, gasoline and diesel fuels, but without, how did you word it? Without disrupting any mobility. That is a really key key point. So one of the things I'd like to start off with before we do our overview of propane in Autogas, what does constitute success in that displacement? Why are we trying to get rid of more, gasoline and diesel? Well, for obvious reasons on the cleanliness and everything else. But 4 things have to happen to meet that success that Alex was talking about without disrupting mobility. So these 4 things apply to, electric vehicles, biodiesel, natural gas, hydrogen fuel cell, and of course it applies to propane as well. So let's take a peek at them really quick. If we want to displace diesel, it has to be cleaner. Okay, we're not going to go backwards anymore. It has to be cleaner than gasoline and diesel both. It has to be less expensive than the fuel that's in there, because there's no way we can subsidize something into existence in a sustainable way. It has to be cheaper. And 3, it has to work just as well. We have to have the same performance, the same horsepower, torque, and the same range that we're used to with what we're using with gasoline and diesel. And it goes without saying, we have to have a lot of this energy at our disposal. So how does propane line up with those 4 criteria? Well, we're going to see today that propane has the lowest cost-effective emission reductions than any other fuel, especially when it comes to the most toxic of those, and that's the nitrogen oxide emissions from the tailpipe. It does have the lowest cost of ownership. Mark and both Tom and I will be speaking on that. And you don't have to compromise on any of the performance issues of using that vehicle, especially no compromising in the range of that vehicle. It goes without saying, we've got a lot of it. We've got more propane in these United States than all the other countries combined. We used about 9 billion gallons of it last year here in our country, but we exported nearly 20 billion gallons. So it's part of my job actually to make sure that we start turning that around and having more of it used domestically. And I think after the end of this, you guys will be convinced to start adopting a little bit more of this in our fleets. So what is it? Well, it is exactly the same fuel. We call it Autogas when we're moving it in a vehicle down the road, but it is the same propane that you use out on your back patio, to grill your steaks, and it's so clean we let it touch our food. But more of it gets used in heating homes, in agriculture. We've been using it in forklifts for decades and decades, long before we were, counting emissions through the EPA or CARB, because basically it was just common sense. When we use forklifts inside a warehouse with gasoline and diesel, people would die. And so when we use forklifts that operating on propane inside, it's very clean. And we have a lot of off-road, especially in the commercial mowers, using it as well. It comes from 2 sources. We have an organic source where most of it comes from, but more recently we've been moving into a renewable source. And I'll get into that a little bit towards the very end. But suffice it to say, both of these sources have the exact same molecular structure and they have the same attributes. They're non-toxic and can't contaminate soil or water or air. It totally evaporates. And so we don't have the same kind of risk that diesel and gasoline do with leakage and spillage into those areas. Why do fleets choose propane Autogas? Well, we're going to go through these things today. You're going to see that total cost of ownership, lower emissions, a lot less reduced noise too. I hope Tom Hopkins tells some of the stories about how bus drivers really like the reduced noise, and most of them really like it. And I'll let Tom talk about that a little bit more, especially in the employee and driver retention areas. But the less maintenance and increased uptime is huge for fleets. And it also doesn't hurt your corporate image to do a very green pathway. And speaking of pathways, what is propane's pathway to zero emissions? Well, we started off with right out of the gate, scoring super high on particulate matter reductions. We have very little, virtually zero when it comes to PM. And next we tackle the nitrogen oxides, the most dangerous tailpipe emission that we have, especially for contributing to respiratory illnesses. And I would like to say in this case, the same group, at West Virginia University that busted Volkswagen for their NOx scandal on all their vehicles, they did a NOx mobile emission of the two exact same buses. One was a clean diesel, best-in-class clean diesel versus the best-in-class propane bus. They were on the same route. They had their mobile emissions. This wasn't in a lab. The mobile emissions was on those buses, and they traveled for several months going on the same route. They measured those emissions, those nitrogen oxides emissions, and even though both of them, qualified for EPA and CARB standards, the real emissions coming out of those things was telling, and that is propane was 96% cleaner than the clean diesel. And now our next big tackle is greenhouse gas emissions. Not only the greenhouse gas emissions from the tailpipe, which our new technologies are starting to do, but also the life cycle analysis of greenhouse gas. And we're going to do that at the very end. So what do we have to offer now? We can basically go in a variety of different kinds of fleets. We certainly do law enforcement and paratransit, all of these. I like the sweet spot of class 3 through 7, and I'll tell you why here in just a little bit. But we have a host of OEMs and manufacturers that produce propane systems for a variety of platforms. Tom Hopkins is going to talk about Roush. Freightliner has a OEM solution. Greencraft in California has also a 0.02 NOx, like Roush and the PSI engines. Agility has their 8.0. PSI just achieved their ultra low NOx standards. Mark Denton's going to talk a lot more about the aftermarket systems that Alliance Autogas provides in a variety of vehicle platforms and manufacturers. ICOM can do the same with an aftermarket biofuel system. Campbell Parnell is pretty narrow. They specialize in that Isuzu cab over and do it quite well. As a matter of fact, for the largest recycler of automotive parts, LKQ, they are converting all of their thousands of vehicles around the country. But school buses is the most popular. We have our greatest success story in the school bus market, and all three of the major OEMs provide an option of running their vehicles on propane. I'll let Tom talk a little bit more about how much Bluebird has been doing in their arena for actually switching up their diesel production. All told, we have earlier this year achieved our 20,000 school bus vehicle mark running on propane. This is over 1,000 school districts and contractors around our country that have not only adopted this, but grown it to a point where we can move 1.25 million students every single day when all of our schools are open. And it shows up well when we do an actual comparison. This is a Type D. I'll pick on Bluebird because they produce all four of these. And if you go to the dealer and you ask them, hey, I want a Type C bus that has this, 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 and this, and all I want to change on the quote is just the energy source. So you have a diesel bus at the lowest price there, not much of an incremental cost to go up to a propane, about 35% more for the compressed natural gas. But the electric version gets to be pretty spendy. And it doesn't seem to me, if you can reduce 96% of the tailpipe emissions for less than, about 10% of the vehicle cost, I'm not sure why I would want to spend that much more just to get a little bit cleaner. But that's okay, I'll let you decide. Well, other people have decided too. These are the stats for the school bus fundings of Volkswagen settlement funds being displaced around the country. And you can see that the blue area is the amount of dollars spent, the yellow area is the number of buses deployed. And propane has a very right side up equation when it comes to this. Two states got compared recently, and in October 27th, the release of data, Texas and California. You can see that California spent $816 million to reduce emissions in their state, and they reduced 35 tons of NOx over this 15-year period. Well, Texas had a little bit different approach. They spent less than California did, but nearly doubled the NOx reductions in that same 15-year period. And it's because Texas had more of an all-of-the-above approach, allowing fleets to pick the very best alternative energy that was going to reduce those emissions most cost effectively, where California had a very narrow approach of, hey, it's going to have to be EV to make this happen. And you can see, like Wanda and both Alex said, the clean cities have an all-of-the-above approach. They're fuel agnostic, and when you actually put that into play, it works much, much better. So what's on the horizon for propane auto gas in the markets? What's the next school bus success story? And it's going to be in that class 3 through 7, high volume fuel consumption, because the more fuel you use at a lower price, the more savings that you're going to get. And that certainly happens with propane. And we're not limited to just last mile kind of delivery routes or short run. We can go the full regional routes in up to even more than 300 miles a day without stopping to fuel. Those 3 markets that are my favorites that are catching up with the school bus are the food and beverage delivery. I think you saw on one of Ben's slides, the Schwann's was there. They have over 4,000 propane vehicles nationwide. Another one I like to highlight is Nestle Waters trucks. Started off with 5 of those trucks about 5 years ago, and now they have over 1,000 of them in the United States moving with propane. A very up and coming one now is paratransit, the shuttle buses that are in every single county, meeting the ADA, American with Disabilities Act requirements, but also moving people, all throughout their counties. I just did a study with Herb Mullins in Eastern North Carolina, and they're traveling over 300 miles a day per vehicle and saving a tremendous amount. But nationwide, they're averaging about 600 gallons per month, which is about twice the fuel consumption of a school bus, just to put it in perspective. So if you think you're saving money with school buses, you're going to save even a lot more when you're operating these with paratransit. One of my very favorite is actually the parcel package delivery. We know about UPS and their 1,000+ propane powered package cars and FedEx independent contractors, but the United States Postal Service actually contracts the vast majority of their work. Now they do the first mile and last mile, but 70,000 of the 92,000 routes are actually being delivered through independent contractors that own their own trucks and, more importantly, fuel their own trucks. And there's about 10,000 of these vehicles that are going between every zip code in these United States, delivering from hub to hub and distribution center to distribution center. And they use over 1,000 gallons of fuel a month per truck because they're operating 6.5 days a week, day and night. And propane provides that. We're getting more and more adoption in that arena as well. A lot of people have total cost of ownership calculators to project in the future what you'd be saving if you use their alternative energy and compared to what they're using now. Well, I wanted to do a study, and I've done 3 of these so far, and this is one of them. It was a 5-year forensic historical study. So what we did is we took one company here that had 2 exact same trucks, the same model year, 2015, the same region of the country, doing the same work. And we analyzed all of their maintenance records and all of their fuel records to determine an actual cost per mile to operate that over the last 5 years. And when you add up the maintenance cost and the fuel cost, it was nearly 30 cents a mile cheaper on propane than it was diesel. And Mark's going to cover infrastructure costs. I just wanted to show this picture because the various dispensers that we have, you can pump fuel 13 gallons a minute out of all of them, but there's varying degrees of fuel management and also retail, like this one off of Interstate I-94 in Minnesota that was on that Michigan to Montana corridor that was talked about earlier for what's going on in Florida. The only thing I'd like to add is the regulations as of January 1st, 2020. We have a new quick connect mandate that goes on all vehicles. And this allows for a very simple connection, and it allows for us to do this without gloves or eye protection. The only thing I'd say about infrastructure is if you do a cost analysis, you know, if you wanted to and you want all the kind of bells and whistles on your dispenser for fuel management system, you can spend $40,000 on doing that. But and it's very scalable, but if you go CNG, even with the overnight time fill, you're going to be spending a couple $100,000. Electric for those 10 same shuttles is going to be even more. The best part about propane is it's very, very scalable. You can add another tank in the back. You don't have to change the dispensers on the fuel management system. It works very well. All right, so on the technology horizon, we've been doing a project with Cummins, the second largest engine manufacturer in the world. And we asked them to do the best they could with taking advantage of the attributes of propane. Its cleanliness, its high octane, all of those things. And they started with a 6.7 liter diesel block that they had, but everything else was purpose built just to maximize propane's use. Able to get a very high compression ratio back, and with increased compression ratios, we're able to get higher efficiencies. Higher efficiencies give you better miles per gallon. It also gives you better power and torque, but more importantly, it reduces your emissions. And for the first time, we have an alternative fuel. If you look at all of these lines here on this torque and horsepower curve, the black line up here is the line that shows diesel, and this is in their best case diesel, first responder vehicles for fire trucks and things like that. Well, this green line on top of that is actually propane. We surprised everybody with more horsepower and torque than diesel was providing with the same displacement. This hasn't been done before, but because of that efficiency, we're able to make propane even cleaner with, sorry, I jumped ahead too quick, cleaner on the greenhouse gas tailpipe emissions than the diesel by this much. So what's the future of propane autogas as a fuel? Well, we talked about it at the very beginning, at the beginning, where we have two sources, mostly comes from the organic source, where we have the most natural resource of that anywhere in the world. But in the renewable side of things, carbon reduction goal regulations in states 10 years ago was not real popular, but fast forward 10 years and we have a lot more states introducing legislation to reduce their carbon footprint goals. In comes renewable propane. This is where we have a much lower carbon intensity, lots of inexpensive feedstock out there, and it's very low intensity energy to generate. We have two main sources today. 5 million gallons is coming out of REG, and Mark can tell you who to talk to about getting some of that here on his presentation. But we also have renewable DME, which is mostly done right now in Southern California. And what it is has a carbon intensity of minus 278. So when we blend some of that in with propane, because the molecules are virtually the same, very, very close, we get a carbon intensity that is in the single digits. So let's do a greenhouse gas life cycle analysis between two trucks. I like to do this because it really puts it in perspective. We'll do a mid-duty, kind of like one of those postal trucks or one of the trucks that you see here on the screen, a mid-duty truck traveling 200 miles a day for a year. Just one truck to one truck comparison, one on propane and one being charged off of the electric grid. Now, the electric grid has energy sources that electricity comes from. Coal, you can see on the top left here as the percentage of coal that goes into those electric grids. Natural gas in the top right, not much on the petroleum side, except in the isolated case of Hawaii, and not much on the biomass. But in the renewable side, you can see where nuclear is real popular, where hydro in the Pacific Northwest especially generates a lot of electricity with a very low carbon intensity, and wind and solar, and where those are most popular today as well. All told, the one on the right is the carbon intensity of the grid for that particular state. Okay, and you can see the red states there are a little higher in their carbon intensity, mostly because of the coal usage in generating electricity through their grid. But on the left is the carbon intensity of our regular organic propane, the ones that we use every day today. And in the pads, there's 5 pads over there, they range from 79 to 83. That's the carbon intensity. And when you overlay that onto the electric grid, you can see where propane is either going to be better or just about the same on a lot of cases. Now, when we take that electric truck versus propane mid-duty truck with 200 miles a day for a year, this is exactly what we get. This is actually the delta, the change in CO2 emissions per ton if you compare the two vehicles in their relative states. So if you look at this, Texas is 169 tons of CO2 less with the propane truck than with the same truck running from being charged on the electric grid there. And you can see the states in red where the electric is actually going to be better. So 38 states already are going to be much cleaner, including Florida, operating on propane than being charged from the electric grid when it comes to CO2 life cycle. Now, we introduced the renewable propane, and we're already better in every state except Vermont, where all of their electricity basically comes from the Canadian hydro source. So when we do a blend of renewable propane with renewable DME, we're way better in every single state by a significant amount than the electric grid. Well, stop, Steve. You need to know that the electric grid is getting cleaner. So let's project into the future to 2035. When we have an electric grid that is 95% renewable, and we're going to go from a 1,000 cycle battery to a 5,000 cycle battery, and we're going to give it a million miles on that battery life. Well, even then, our best case of renewable propane is still better than the electric grid. Now, some of you are going to want to check me, so you can go to all of the sources that we use to generate those numbers here, and because it's recorded, I don't need to dwell on this long enough for you to make notes. You can come back and get it. Sum it all up, benefits of propane are very cost effective. Overall, most propane upfits are about 15% of the cost of the vehicle or less, okay? Which is a far cry from a lot of the other sources, especially on the EV side. We don't have any payload increase to the vehicle because basically we're replacing the gasoline or diesel on that vehicle. And so we don't have to put on a lot of heavy battery weight, especially in the heavier truck markets that are needed. And then we've seen the CO2 emission reductions compared to EV. You can always go to propane.com to see more of this. My information is here as well. I'd be happy to answer all the questions that you have at the end of the session. Ben, thanks for your time.
Thank you, Steve. I told you all you would learn a lot from Steve. Folks, remember you can ask questions using the Q&A or chat functions on your screen. Please do ask questions. We welcome them. Steve mentioned Tom Hopkins a couple times during his presentation. Tom's with Roush CleanTech, and he is their business development manager and is going to be able to tell you a lot about the propane vehicles that are available to you. Tom comes from a background where he was managing a large fleet, you know, and then went into Roush where he was servicing those fleets, and now he's business development manager. So he really understands that fleet perspective, and he's going to tell you a little bit about what the vehicle options are that are out there. Tom, take it away.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it. I can't believe I agreed to follow Steve. He's a tough act to follow on these things, but I'll do my best to give you some good relevant information and talk a little bit about our propane fuel systems. Just a quick overview. Roush CleanTech is, of course, one of the brands that fall under the Roush umbrella and their brand portfolio, including Roush Industries, that does a lot of OEM, automotive manufacturing, engineering, design, prototyping, and support for almost all the major automotive OEMs. Of course, Roush Fenway Racing also falls into that bucket. Roush Fenway Racing is the winningest NASCAR team in history. Jack Roush prides himself on that. Although we've had some lean years, we are making changes to bring them back to the championship podium. Roush Performance Products also in that bucket. Does the high performance Mustangs and F-150s, F-250s, and now the Ford Ranger. And then Roush CleanTech is the newest company in the under the Roush umbrella, founded in 2010 and dedicated to working with fleets to lower operating costs and improve their carbon footprint while deploying robust alternative fuel solutions. So today we do provide fuel systems for the Bluebird Vision Type C school bus and the Microbird Type A school bus. We also have fuel systems in that the Ford medium duty class 3 through 7 range that Steve mentioned, strip chassis, cutaways, to name a few. We do utilize the purpose-built engine from Ford with the gaseous prep package to ensure the full warranty stays intact. We do have OEM ordering options on our commercial products to ensure ease of installation. Because we are QVM certified from Ford, which is a process that they have available for third-party entities to follow to maintain full factory warranty on their powertrain system. When you do integrate an alternative fuel product, we do comply with the QVM standards. So anything that we put our fuel system on, we match the Ford powertrain warranty, and we do have that OEM support from a warranty standpoint, whether it's a 5-year 60,000, 5-year 100,000 mile, or in the case of Bluebird, a 5-year unlimited mile warranty. And then, as Steve indicated, our fuel systems are designed to have no compromise to horsepower, torque, or towing capacity, no matter the platform. When we talk to fleets, most commonly, we're talking about a number of different fuels today, whether it's diesel, gasoline, propane, CNG, or electric. And when we started the development of our systems way back in 2007, we wanted to make sure that we had a product that could provide fleets easy adoptable solution that provided energy independence, that did improve their emissions footprint, that had an easy refueling infrastructure, that did have a good ROI tied to it, didn't have any compromise to range, that maintenance was very easy, that it was very scalable, and it worked in all weather applications, whether cold, hot, or mild. When we looked at all of those things, propane really does check all of those boxes. I know Steve mentioned a lot of this, but the refueling piece is very easy to do for fleets. There is no compromise to range or performance on the vehicles. You do get simplification, particularly in a school bus environment. When you look at the diesel emission components and whatnot today, I'm going to talk a little bit about later on. But it is a simple, robust alternative that can deliver for your fleet. Just a quick look at the Florida deployments. When you talk about school bus, we have 16 districts or customers currently running over 800 school buses in the state of Florida. I know that it was touched on earlier, the number of vehicles running in the Tampa Bay area, but we do have a decent footprint across the state. When you look at the commercial deployments, we talked about Schwann's and Nestle Waters USA, AmeriGas, AmeriFleet, the different transit agencies, Lee Tran down in Fort Myers, Broward County Transit, Palm Tran in West Palm Beach, Votran, just to name a few, are operating well over 200 transit buses in those markets. So we've got a pretty robust footprint of commercial use as well in the state of Florida, with 44 customer locations operating 451 vehicles. When we talk to decision makers about their fleet buying purchases or their fleet purchases, we typically talk about 4 different buckets. The energy side of it, energy independence, the duty cycle side of it, the financial piece is always most important, and the environmental piece as well. So I'm going to touch on a few of these things. I know starting with the energy independence piece first, Steve covered a lot of this, but one of the things that we find most important to fleets that are making the decision to change to an alternative fuel is the stability of the cost of the fuel. And we've demonstrated this time and time again in TCO modeling that propane really does have a nice delta below the gasoline or diesel when it comes to the purchase price. And fleets can typically count on having at least $1 to $1.30 per gallon savings when they change to propane. One of the nice things about the fuel component as well, I'm sure Mark's going to touch on this, is that fleets can lock in for multi-year terms, depending on who their provider is, and renegotiate those when the terms come up to lock in even lower fuel prices as well. The nice thing about it is you scale up your fleet with an alternative like propane, you increase your gallons, which gives you leverage to drive your pricing down when you come up on that next negotiating term. So really great to be able to count on a fuel budget based on your previous year's gallons. That's not going to have a 20 or 30 cent spike at different times throughout the year because of change in season, travel, or things that may be happening in the Gulf or overseas. So really nice residual from propane. The other thing that we talk most commonly about with fleets, in particular with school bus fleets, is duty cycle simplification. So when you look at the leading powertrain package on school bus today is the diesel package, and with our example of Bluebird, the Cummins ISB 6.7, they use 17 quarts of oil, and I think it's a $23 to $27 spend on oil filter. Compared to what we have with propane with the Ford powertrain today, the V10 or V8 product, 7 to 8 quarts of oil and a $4 spin on oil filter, you have substantial savings just on a basic preventative maintenance. Now you're going to change the oil a little bit more frequently on the V8 or V10, 5,000 miles versus 7 to 10 on the diesel. But in terms of cost, that 7 to 8 quart oil change is going to run you about $40, where the diesel oil change is going to run you close to $200. So even if you're changing 2 to 1 with the Ford powertrain, you're still going to save about $100 PM versus PM. The other thing that we talk most commonly about with school fleets is the diesel emission components. The diesel emission components weren't designed for a school bus duty cycle application. So you've got this low speed stop-start duty cycle. And the emission components are important. They're what make the diesel bus today compliant to today's emission standards. So a lot of moving parts there. Things like your SCR catalyst, your DEF head assembly, your turbochargers, all very costly. And when you talk to fleets about what they may be faced with after the warranty period, these components add up. And if you were to completely change all of these components at least one time post-warranty, that's an additional $21,000 in expense. Now that's just not to say that they're all going to fail one time post-warranty, but there's a pretty good chance that some of these components are going to fail, and some of them may even fail multiple times, particularly in a school bus application that's running 10, 12, or 15 years for its life cycle. So that's significant cost that you have to consider when you look at the full life cycle of your fleet. The other nice thing about propane, in particular with the Ford powertrain, is that we find both in commercial fleets and school bus fleets that there's a lot of commonality with their other vehicles that they're running that they're not considering for alternative, or that there's not a package for alternative at this time. You get commonality with with your fluids, your spark plugs, your parts. I mentioned the warranty, of course, and the diagnostic software. So you don't have to add a lot of tooling or added components into your shop to provide support when you add this Ford powertrain powered by propane. In fact, the only thing that's different versus the gasoline vehicles that are on the road today is a fuel filter that gets changed at 50,000 miles. So pretty simple from a standpoint of a PM. I'm going to back up just a minute too and talk about those emission components. I talked about the cost associated there. When you look at conversely the Ford side of it as an example, when you look at a full service at 100,000 miles for your tune-up with your spark plugs and belts and hoses, ejectors, oxygen sensors, that runs about $3,000 if you were to do everything all at once, including all of the fuel injectors. So just a fraction of the cost of the out of warranty expense and that powertrain versus the diesel. Steve touched on a little bit about how simple propane systems have become. This is a top-down look of the school bus. We have our fuel fill valve located on this example, street side at the back of the bus, very similar to where a diesel receptacle would be located. We have our fuel tanks located between the frame rails in a very safe and secure manner with crash protection surrounding them. We use durable, high-strength stainless steel fuel lines that push the fuel up to our fuel rail pressure control module, as an example with our system. That fuel rail pressure control module helps us manage the flow of fuel into the fuel rails and injectors and then back to the fuel tank. Our system today is a closed system, so we only use the amount of fuel that we have to at the fuel injectors, and whatever we don't use, we recycle back to the fuel tank. The financial piece of it, one of the most important pieces, Steve touched on a little bit about TCO messaging. We have some modeling that we can do on a variety of ways. We tend to lean more on the simplest form, which is basically fuel cost and preventative maintenance, because those things are always static. You can't really focus on or count on parts that are going to fail at 6,000 miles or 25,000 miles or 80,000 miles. So the one thing we do know is that you're going to change your oil, you're going to refuel your bus, you're going to use DEF. So when we talk to school bus customers, we typically talked about cost of ownership in its most simplest form, just basic preventative maintenance and fuel. And in this example that we did earlier in the year for a customer, diesel at the time was at $2.50 a gallon, gasoline was at $2.20, and propane was at $1.10 a gallon at the customer's market. And when you run a 15-year duty cycle over 15 years, and you look at just the fuel cost and the basic PMs, the propane bus, without any incentives at all, comes in at about 13 cents per mile savings versus diesel. When you look at the past 10 years and what the federal government has done with the alternative fuel tax credits that are available, today you can also take advantage of a 36-cent per gallon tax rebate for every gallon that you dispense out of your own station. So if you consider that fuel rebate in this model as well from the federal government, your savings goes up to 29 cents per mile. And over the life of a vehicle, without incentives, you'd save about $2,000 a year in operating costs just in that basic model. With the federal tax incentive that's available today, you could save as much as $3,200 in savings just in your fuel and basic maintenance. So the ROI is there to make the justification for transitioning to an alternative fuel. We have a lot of case studies that we've done and testimonials from customers. Here's a few on the screen. Some of these highlighted just their raw savings. Some of them highlighted their all-in loaded savings with labor and considering what they save from their shop standpoint. Perfect guys saved 15 cents per mile just with the basic TCO that we used. Crestwood School District in Iowa, 34 cents per mile on average with their school bus fleet. That includes their driver, their mechanics labor. Upper Moreland in Pennsylvania, very similar, $7,000 per bus in their first year in savings. That's all in with labor as well, labor savings. San Diego MTS, paratransit fleet, reported to us in their case study that they saved $9,700 annually per bus by making the transition to propane. In Cook, Illinois, a school bus contractor in Chicago lowered their fuel operating costs by over 80%. So pretty substantial savings when you look at propane as an alternative. The environmental piece, Steve touched on this. I just want to highlight where we're at today. The new 7.3 liter engine from Ford. As an aggregate, when you look at the constituents on the left, we're about 70% cleaner than today's standards. We do have low NOx offering as our standard product at 0.05 NOx and an ultra low NOx at 0.02 that's available within our commercial and school bus fleet offerings. Steve touched on this, a great advantage from a refueling standpoint. Propane is non-toxic, non-carcinogenic, non-contaminant. It doesn't contaminate groundwater, it doesn't spill or puddle. So huge advantage at your fuel island without not having to worry about monitoring. Electronic monitoring is very expensive. Manual monitoring can be very cumbersome for your staff. You don't have to worry about remediation should you have a leak or a spill that impacts your ground or groundwater around your station. So a huge advantage there with propane. It dissipates into the atmosphere. So refuelers like it because they don't have to worry about getting fuel on them or on their clothes and taking it home where they have that oily smell, that gasoline smell. Steve touched on this from the PERC study standpoint, but I also want to note that earlier this year, the European Federation of Transportation did a study that demonstrated on new diesel products overseas, they produced ultrafine particulate that isn't regulated yet. And during regen, that particulate emission spiked between 32 and 115%. So this is a European study. It'll be interesting to see how the EPA and ARB look at this information and if it translates to any changes to what's coming in 2024 or 2027 from an emission standpoint change. And lastly, the Georgia State University study that demonstrated that last year that students that rode on lower emission school buses actually performed better in the classroom in math and English and had better attendance than those of their counterparts that rode to school on a diesel higher emission school bus. So this study is available online. Again, independent study from Georgia State University. And just a couple slides on safety. This is another thing that we get asked about a lot. Is propane safe? And it is. It's considered as safe as any conventional fuel. It has a very narrow flammability range. The fuel tanks, as I mentioned, are 20 times more puncture resistant to traditional gas or diesel tanks. They're made of ductile steel that's eighth inch thick. And they're leak checked before they leave our facility. So every tank that we have that we build up from a raw shell is charged to 20 times or 4 times its operating pressure, 4 times its operating pressure to over 1200 PSI, and then submerged in this device that has hundreds of molecular devices that are sniffing out for that inert gas that we charge the tank with to see if there's any leaks. It has to maintain a certain pressure for a certain amount of time in this cavity. And once it passes, it goes on. Some of the pressure gets bled off before it's shipped onto the end user for installation. Should it fail, the tank is condemned, put aside for our quality team to do a tear down with our manufacturing engineer and a quality individual from our tank manufacturer. And just another top-down look at that school bus. Aside from the tank being very robust and made of steel, we also have several redundant electronic and manual shut-off valves throughout the system. So should there be a breach in the system, whether it's at the supply side of the tank, the return side of the tank, or the engine fuel rail, the electronic shut-offs will engage. Should there be a loss of power on the bus, the manual shutoffs will engage. So any kind of potential for a leak will be isolated very, very quickly because of these redundant safety features that we built into the system. And then lastly, before I summarize, the service support on propane in general, whether it's our system or someone else's system, has grown significantly. We've invested tens of thousands of dollars in training materials that we deploy for free. But we also have hired an individual that goes out and verifies our service network. So we now can say with confidence that we have over 600 service locations throughout the country that include Ford dealers, Bluebird dealers, and independent shops that are available to work on the system. When we have a new deployment of propane vehicles into a market, we have a dedicated individual now that goes out and vets that market to make sure we have, number one, service support. If we don't, works with the customer to ensure we have a robust service support entity for them once they get their vehicles and deploy them. And then lastly, I'll just wrap up with propane systems are very simple and very robust today. There is no duty cycle compromise. They are very economical to operate. They are safe by composition and design, and they are environmentally responsible from well to wheels. And with that, I will turn it back over to Ben. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Tom. So now you've heard a lot about the vehicle. You might be wondering about the infrastructure. How do I feel those vehicles? And so we have Mark Denton, Vice President of Blossman Gas, to talk to you about the infrastructure side of the equation. When I asked Mark to tell me about himself by way of introduction, he just told me to tell you all that he's been doing this for a long time and he's seen it all. So Mark, let's hear about some of the things you've seen when it comes to the propane autogas infrastructure side of the coin.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you for having me this morning. I don't want to go back and go through everything that we've gone through. I just want to hit some of the highlights that kind of wraps it all up when we talk about fueling. You know, when we start talking about autogas, and it's been consistent with me for the last probably 15 years, it always starts out with the 3 E's. What are the 3 E's of why we do this? Energy independence, environment, and economics. And when those 3 E's are met, it makes a whole lot of sense to look at autogas. The other thing we talk about in every aspect, and Tom and Steve and the others touched on it, but it's really important. I've never made a presentation to a potential customer where safety didn't come up. And safety is obviously an important factor when you start talking about alternative fuels. And so without going back through everything Tom shared, just a couple of the things that we talk about, the propane tanks being 20 times more puncture resistant than the traditional gasoline or diesel. The safety valves that are built into the vehicle systems and the autogas infrastructure. One example of that would be, he talked about back checks. So we not only have mechanical and electronic shutoff valves, but we also have passive shutoff valves that in the event that we have a leak or a problem, those mechanical valves will also stop the flow of fuel. So on every autogas dispenser built out there, we're also required by law to have a pull away. We always tell people when we're doing the safety training, I know your drivers are way too smart for this, but in the event that your driver forgets what he's doing and drives away with our fuel hose connected, it's going to be a bad day, but it's not going to be a dangerously bad day. And it can be restored because of the pull away. The other thing about autogas refueling is simple. Propane is stored and transferred as a liquid. So we're not doing anything to change the physical characteristics of the fuel. All we're doing is using a small displacement pump and motor to move that liquid product from a storage tank into your storage tank on your vehicle. So that makes the ability to use propane affordable and simple. It's also portable. Most of our customers start out with skid mounting dispensing equipment. A lot of them will start with a single 1,000 gallon tank, and it can grow from there up to a 30,000 gallon tank, which makes them scalable as you grow. They're adaptable. So all of our modern autogas refueling equipment is pulsar ready, which is a fancy term for whatever fuel management system that you're using, we can connect to it and give you the same data on autogas that you're getting on diesel. So for example, with our school bus applications, a lot of the school districts are using a fuel master as an example of their proprietary fuel management system. Our Autogas dispensers connect to that fuel master, and they get the same detailed data that they use for management on Autogas that they get on diesel. And then lastly, and very importantly, it's affordable. In most cases, the fuel provider who is providing the fuel for you under contract will provide the Autogas fueling equipment at little to no cost. So for example, if we are going in there and putting in an Autogas fueling facility for you, let's see if I can get this to work. There we go. So school bus, for example, on-site fueling is a prevalent, but a lot of school districts will also go to a third-party site. If they start out small, we have a school district in Birmingham, Alabama, that goes to one of our shared access fueling facilities right off of I-20. And so they get to take advantage of, while they have a small number of buses, the ability to get that fuel at a great price without having to put infrastructure on site. Modern propane fueling equipment fills at 8 to 12 gallons per minute. This is very comparable to a diesel or a gasoline. So if you look at the extended range Bluebird, for example, school bus that has a 98-gallon tank, in typically less than 10 minutes, you can fuel that bus. So Steve and others talked about in the middle of the screen, the Quick Connect nozzle. By code, by law, effective January of this year, we moved away from the Acme, which was a thread-on type fuel nozzle, to the Quick Connect, the Euro style. What that does for us is it not only reduces emissions, we're down to 0.4 cc's emissions at connection and disconnection, but it also eliminates the need for any type of PPE. We don't have to have goggles, we don't have to have gloves. It's a very simple, efficient connection. The other thing that's great about it is you're either connected or you're not connected. So if that nozzle is not connected, no fuel is going to flow. We talked about the pull away. You can see there on the right hand with the dispenser cabinet. Next to the nozzle is that pull away or breakaway device that gives us that added safety. So we've talked about fueling skids. You can install an Autogas for a fraction of the cost of gasoline. The way we typically talk about it is, as the fuel provider, we'll provide you everything that's portable in our skid package, including tanks, pumps, motors, dispensers, etc. You pay for the things that are permanent. For example, you would typically pay for electrical, crash protection, concrete, canopies, etc. Those things that are permanent anyway, that are typically improvements to your site. I talked about the fact that it's pulsar ready, which means it doesn't matter to us what type fuel management system you have, our system will communicate with it. Propane skids are scalable, so a lot of our fleets start small and they add. By the way, most of our skids are 230 volt, single phase voltage. So I have not seen a site yet that didn't have capacity to connect Autogas fueling. Shared fueling sites give you 24/7 access in many locations. So some of the things that I'm going to go through, I'm going to go through them quickly. The site prep, engineered requirements, and so forth. Again, keep in mind, most of this responsibility should fall on your gas supplier. Electrical classification drawings, concrete pads, crash protections, permittings with the authority having jurisdiction. You as the end user should not have to worry about this stuff. This is where your propane supplier is the expert in all these areas, and we are the ones responsible for making sure that your equipment meets all of the codes, standards, and approval by the authority having jurisdiction. Our skids are fully assembled and tested prior to getting here. The electrical connections are already pre-done. The tank is pressure tested to make sure everything is safe before it's ever shipped. And then once the tank is installed on site and all the final connections are made, we provide that on-site employee training at no cost. Again, approved equipment. We can use all these acronyms that you shouldn't care about. NFPA 58, NFPA 30A. Again, those are our responsibilities to make sure that you have equipment that is approved in every jurisdiction. We talk a lot about the fact that it's up to the fuel supplier to know their business and to know the permitting and to know the approval and the installation. So I always share with our potential customers, just make sure that you're in your RFPs, your request for proposals, that you're getting a state-of-the-art, modern, pulsar-ready Autogas dispensing equipment. And then we help them with that. So there's some maintenance things, again, that are provided and paid for by the fuel supplier. There's a nozzle lubrication that needs to take place on a regular basis. There's some lubrication that takes place for the pump and motor. Our company, Blossman Gas, we go out twice a year without being asked to. This is a company requirement, and we touch every Autogas dispenser. We upgrade and train any people on the fueling, the use of that Autogas dispenser. We make sure the pump and motor have been properly serviced. We check the fire extinguisher, we check the image, we check for pullaways and emergency shutoff valves and so forth. And we provide that because we want to make sure that our equipment is operating efficiently and the way it was intended to operate. So we provide that at no cost to our customers. So I'm going to then turn it back over to Ben and be available for any questions at the end.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for the reminder to participants to ask questions if necessary. We are happy to answer them. So we've heard about propane at the kind of the high level. We've learned a lot about the fuel. Next, we got into the vehicles, and now we just heard about the infrastructure. So we figured we'd put it all together and talk to a fleet operator who is using propane on a daily basis. So in a second, once the lag catches up to me, I'll take over the screen here, and we will introduce Zach Rossley. Zach is the Chief Operating Officer for Kipp Jacksonville Schools. And Zach, when we first heard about him and his propane program at Kipp Schools several years ago, we immediately reached out to him and started to involve him in our work. And he has always been more than always been eager to share his story, and I think that speaks volumes. And what we're going to do is Zach and I are going to just go through a little Q&A. I'm going to ask some questions same questions you might have, and Zach's going to give us his answers, and we'll just get started with that. So Zach, welcome. Good to be talking to you again. Hope all is well with you.
You too. Can you hear me?
Yep, you're coming through
Okay,
nice and clear. So let's just start out with the basics. I mean, we've got some pictures here for folks to see, but and we can refer to them as we talk. But let's start out with the basic. How many Autogas propane vehicles are in your fleet right now?
23.
And they're school buses, of course. We've heard a lot about school buses today. And so tell me a little bit about how you use them, what is kind of their duty cycle.
Sure. So Kipp, for those of you who don't know who we are, so we're a nonprofit public charter school operator here in Jacksonville. So we have 3 schools, serve about 1,600 kids, all in Northwest Jacksonville. We provide free transportation to our students, and about 75% of them in a typical school year ride the bus. And so the function that our buses serve, I'm sure unsurprisingly, is transporting students to and from school each day. We also do a lot of field trips, sporting events. So the buses are sort of our all-purpose student transportation infrastructure.
So Zach, I know when you first started Kipp Schools, you were contracting bus transportation, and eventually you decided that you wanted to take control over your own fleet. So talk a little bit about the decision you made to do that, and why Autogas was the choice you made when you decided that you were going to take responsibility for your fleet?
Yeah, so it's funny. As I was sort of jotting notes down as folks were presenting, and I think the simplest answer I can give is all of the benefits everyone just described. Yes, I mean so we made the decision. I got to Kipp in 2015. We made the decision to explore bringing transportation in-house during my first year at Kipp, and we ultimately made the decision to do so. And so we've been running our own buses ever since, starting in 2016 with 14, and you know, we have, like I said, 23 today, and that number is growing pretty quickly in the next few years. So in fact, we'll probably be operating 50 buses in the next couple years. We're growing pretty rapidly. So I think when we started to think through our options, you know, particularly from the perspective of bringing the program in-house, at the time, we really thought about performance, sort of overall programmatic performance, and cost. It's funny, I don't think the word clean, you know, or what's better for the, you know, for the environment, I don't think that was initially, at least, even part of the decision-making process, because frankly, we didn't even know we had a better option than the usual diesel option. So we started looking at, you know, just sort of building out the models that we use to make the decision, and so many things people have brought up in, you know, during this set of presentations obviously apply to us. So we started doing our research. The possibility of propane buses kind of came out of nowhere. I tried to think back to 2016. I don't remember exactly where the possibility came from. If it was from the bus vendor or AmeriGas, who we now have been working with for years, but you know, that the option was presented to buy propane school buses. And when we quickly sort of did a cost-benefit analysis of doing that, and we started to realize what we could save from the perspective of, again, things that folks have brought up earlier, but the fuel, you know, including the stability in pricing, the maintenance savings, you know, the increased useful life of the buses, not having to schedule drivers, you know, to go and fuel the buses off site, because as you can see in the picture on the screen, that is our fuel depot, which is located right between a couple of our buildings. So there were so many reasons from a cost perspective why it made sense. And then, like I said earlier, we also thought to ourselves, okay, we could do something that's less expensive, which is always a great thing. And also do it in a more environmentally sustainable way. And, you know, that really aligned well with our mission of being good stewards, you know, of the families and the neighborhoods we serve in Northwest Jacksonville. So, you know, when we could advertise that we would be driving, you know, buses that were quieter, cleaner, better for the environment, you know, those were definitely wins when it came to communicating with families. And there were certainly challenges, but those were some of the wins.
I mean, that's a great story, Zach. You know, when faced with starting from scratch, you know, this is the decision you made, and I bet folks find that a powerful testimonial. So once you did, you did the business case. You know, clearly propane autogas penciled out very strongly. So you decided you wanted to do it. How did you get started? You mentioned AmeriGas. What was the first step that you took to actually do it?
Yeah, so I think even before we made the final decision, we had I remember this pretty well. We had a Bluebird propane bus come on campus, and we actually gave a couple of our newly hired drivers the opportunity to just sort of you know, test it out a little bit. And I think that, you know, these were experienced drivers who'd been driving diesel buses in the, you know, for local vendors for years. And I think, you know, I remember hearing descriptors like quieter, you know, cleaner, smells better, smoother ride, you know, so we just to, you know, point out, we certainly did even if it had been cost neutral, there were other reasons why it was beneficial. So, and why we ultimately made the decision. But to answer your question, we pretty much immediately went into the infrastructure build. So figuring out how the fueling would work, went through the process of obviously figuring out who to buy the buses from, who to work with from a fueling perspective. And then, just all the steps that had to be taken to be ready to operate the buses, train the drivers on the fueling process. I mentioned the challenges. There was some initial skepticism from some of the newer folks around just the concept of propane. I think people are used to thinking of it as, what they use to run their barbecues. So just sort of some training there and communication with families about what was happening. So I think it was just a combination of the sort of operational side and the community engagement side.
You mentioned the vehicles. Describe your process of choosing the buses that you use. And I think you use more than one type, I think. So maybe talk about how you make those decisions.
Yeah, and I'll readily admit we have a transportation manager who knows more about this stuff in his pinky finger than I do in my whole body, who could probably give you a more technical answer. But I think for us, I think the first step every school year is how many buses will we need, just based on our student enrollment, projecting the number of routes we plan to run. Do we need backups? How many backups? That sort of thing. And then I think from a sort of, which vendor we use, what size bus, I'll be perfectly honest, my transportation manager is more attuned to that part of the decision-making process. But, we're always looking at, have there been any cost increases? Are there any rebate opportunities? We've, I think, pretty consistently chosen the same passenger capacity and those sorts of things. Yeah, so it's just sort of an annual decision-making process.
Mentioned you have your own infrastructure on site there, and we can see it in the photographs. Talk a little bit about your experience with developing and operating your own fueling infrastructure.
Yeah, I think that was one of the biggest the most pleasant surprises when we got into this years ago was, I think one of the initial questions people had was, how do you fuel a propane fuel bus? There's no propane, or very few at least, places to do that, particularly around our schools. So when we found out we could actually, have a sort of a tank, if you will, right there on site, and that fueling would be no different for our drivers than pulling up to a traditional pump or very similar, at least, to pulling up to a traditional gas station pump. I think, like I said, we just had to figure out, sort of what the various requirements were, permitting requirements and these sorts of things, if I remember correctly, for being able to fuel on site. We had to think about capacity, how much fuel would we need, particularly, coincidentally, we had a conversation with AmeriGas this morning about doubling our current capacity because of our growth, along with our ability to fuel, multiple buses versus one at a time, just to gain some efficiency there. So, and I think another thing folks thought about was, I think I said this earlier, we do field trips all over the state. We've had our buses go out of state. So there just, were some initial questions around, so what happens if a bus, needs fuel, and it's, how does that work? And we've never had a problem. We've had some mobile fueling that's been done, sort of prearranged, mobile fueling that's been done. There's never been a convenience reason why using propane has not made the most sense.
Zach, talk a little bit about that mobile fueling instance. I think folks may not fully understand what you're referring to when you say, okay, we're going to go on a field trip and we're going to be far away from our home base here. How exactly do you get the fuel you need?
Yeah, and off the top of my head, I'm trying to think of a specific example, but, like I said, we part of our mission is we try to expose our kids to, just things that they might not have otherwise had the opportunity to be exposed to. So they visited the state capitol. We've taken, trips as I believe a couple of years ago, we drove up to Atlanta, using our buses, but definitely I remember the Tallahassee trip in particular. The exact details escape me, but I think it was literally as simple as just sort of picking a point on the map and saying, this is where we anticipate needing to do a refuel. We had a couple buses on the trip, and it was as convenient as pulling into a parking lot. There was a mobile sort of fueling station there waiting, and the buses pulled up and they were fueled and they went on their way. So it was arguably more convenient than if you had to pull off and wait in line at a gas station.
So that's something that your fuel provider arranges for you as part of the service that they provide. So you talked a little bit about there were some challenges that you had to overcome. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, and a couple of them I've mentioned. So questions around how would it work if we were, fueling on a field trip, or will there be, if there's a maintenance issue, how will that work, since, this is something new. And, we found out right away that we've just never had an issue with, like I said, mobile fueling, or if we have a maintenance issue, there's never been any kind of a delay in getting our issues resolved. I think safety was probably, I know someone mentioned it earlier, but safety was probably a big thing in the beginning, both where the drivers were concerned and just where families were concerned. Then again, it was more about perception than reality. So just making sure people understood that the buses that we were using were actually safer than a traditional school bus. So just sort of educating families so that when we, pulled up to a bus stop and they saw, the sticker on the bus, they didn't freak out and say, what's going on? So, we always try to over communicate to the extent possible. And then, like I said, with the drivers, particularly the newer drivers, it was just getting over some, questions about, when I'm fueling, what happens if some fuel gets on the ground? I mean, am I going to blow up or something? I mean, just that sort of thing. But those were challenges that were really, really easily overcome. So
we talked about the beginning where you were, doing your due diligence, running a business case, investigating the environmental benefits, the safety considerations. So now it's been a few years. You've been running this fleet for several years now, and the fleet continues to grow. Have you been able to kind of step back and evaluate the performance of your propane and autogas fleet and infrastructure versus the assumptions you were making going in? And if so, what have the results been?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, we move a mile a minute, so I probably don't do that as often as I should. But I mean, I can tell you that all of the assumptions we made have proven correct. I mean, the things we were told would be the case have proven to over the years have been the case. The maintenance costs have been lower. The fuel prices have remained stable. The buses have, continued to run, just in a way that the drivers find more appealing. I thought it was really interesting that I think it was Tom that brought up the GSU study, which I'm gonna look up for sure today and send to some friends. But it's, our buses are, we think of them as an extension of our classrooms. That's how we try to, to look at it. I mean, it sounds, I know I'm going maybe off topic just a touch, but it's really important to us that we made this investment. Every investment that we make, at the end of the day, it's about, improving the academic performance, the instructional outcomes for our kids, to the extent that we possibly can. So everything we do, we look at through that lens. So all of the assumptions that we made and the decision we ultimately made, we felt that we could set our kids up, for a better educational experience. And the buses are an extension of the classroom. And I know the drivers, for years I've been hearing that, you know, when the little things that our current fleet of buses offer to them from the perspective of a smoother, quieter, you know, just more, just a better overall driving experience, that translates to how they interact with the kids. It translates to the kids' experience on the buses. It impacts behavior. And so I haven't read that study, but I don't doubt that probably the premise of it is that, you know, if you can provide a calmer, better, more consistent, you know, experience for kids, particularly on their way to school in the morning, that's going to translate into a better transition into the classroom at the start of the day and better learning. So that's been super important to us. And like I say, the things around, you know, around fuel costs, maintenance, our ability to fuel the buses off site, promises that were made around the convenience of being able to increase our fueling capacity. All of those things have panned out over the years for sure.
Well, that's a great message, Zach, and I think we'll end it there. So, folks, you know, you've heard from the industry experts about the fuel, about the vehicles, about the infrastructure. You've heard Zach echo a lot of it as someone who's been there and has been doing it and will continue to be doing it. We didn't have any questions in the Q&A. That must be that we answered them all, and hopefully the Q&A that Zach and I just did was very helpful in answering your own questions. But we very much appreciate your participation in the webinar today, as well as the participation of all the speakers, and welcome you to reach out to the North Florida Clean Fuels Coalition going forward, or the Tampa Bay Clean Fuels Coalition, as you consider your alternative fuel options. And with that, thank you.